Hello, welcome to the Inside the Birds TV emergency live stream. I'm Jeff Mosher of Inside the Birds with my Inside the Birds co-host Adam Kaplan. Of course, Inside the Birds TV presented by DraftKings. Adam, it took long enough, and I know people were starting to get to the point where they were doubting us and several others in the media, but it is now official. Well, it won't be official actually until the start of the league new year, March 17th. But the Eagles have traded Carson Wentz to the Indianapolis Colts, and it happens. The agreement went down today. The announcement has come out from reporting, and here we are. So let's get into everything that we know about the situation. First of all, we should remind people, let people know that I think about 2 weeks now, it feels like 2 years. About 2 weeks ago, you and I co-wrote a story for InsideTheBirds.com after speaking with a lot of league sources, and they all felt that the strongest trade partner for the Eagles was going to be the Indianapolis Colts, and that's what it turns out to be.
Yeah, so our one really good source said that he was almost certain it would be the Colts. This guy said, particularly when you looked at the situation the Colts were in, it gave Wentz a landing spot where he knew the coaches. He had a very close working relationship with Frank Reich. We knew that going in. Obviously, now Press Taylor has been added to their staff as a senior offensive assistant, and we know that Taylor and Wentz had a very close working relationship, so they go there, and their job now is obviously Reich's is, because Reich's the head coach and the play caller. Marcus Brady, by the way, who's the Colts are very high on as their offense coordinator. He was their quarterback's coach. Scott Milinovich is their quarterback's coach now with the Colts. So those guys have the job now to rebuild Carson Wentz. We've been talking about that now for a couple of months. It's not a fix. There's no such thing. It's rebuilding. That's what it is, and that's. Had Wentz stayed here in Philly with the Eagles, that's what would have had to happen. With this new staff, some of it came from the Colts, ironically. Funny how things changed. The more they remain the same. But, yeah, look, I reported about half an hour ago or 45 minutes ago that the Bears had backed out recently for various reasons. Despite all the speculation, there's some stuff that's really bad. I'm not going to slam some reporters. Let me just tell you something. There was not one particular reason, no matter what people think. I've known about this for a bit. There were a bunch of things they looked at, and contract, and you name it. They looked at it. They just decided they don't want to do it. It had nothing to do with hearing something, he might be going to the Colts. He didn't just want to play for the Bears. He only wanted to play for the Colts. You could list a bunch of reasons why the Bears decided they didn't want to do it. There were other teams involved, Jeff. You had reported, I think a couple weeks ago, you had heard they talked to a bunch of teams, and some teams called them. The Eagles called some other teams, and this is the best that they can do. This is and I mentioned this on our show that dropped this morning. And this is really a factor. Teams are able to get their own intel on situations. When a guy like this becomes available, and we could talk all we want that Wentz was benched, there's got to be a reason for it. It's not just one thing, right?
Right. I want to get into that, but before we do get into the why this happened. Let's talk about what you just mentioned. The reality was not only were the Colts the likeliest trade partner, really the one team that showed interest. I mean, like you mentioned, the Bears at one point had discussions. They backed out. I believe you also tweeted the Panthers, who are looking at a quarterback, really weren't involved. Other discussions were exploratory. So when you look at the compensation, which I believe Adam Schefter was the first to report that it was a third-round pick this year, a second-round pick conditionally next year that could become a first-round pick if Wentz plays a certain amount of snaps, or if the team makes the playoffs. What do you have on that?
Yeah, I was just going to say, so a very high-ranking source with another team said that in talking to the Eagles, they felt that they had a 1 coming for next year.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you see the ESPN report. Well, technically, it may eventually be a 1, but we'll have to see what the conditions are.
Right.
They just, listen, the guy was benched last season. How do you justify as a general manager? I'm not talking about Chris Ballard in particular here, the GM of the Colts, but how would you give up a clean 1 for a guy who got benched? I just don't see how you could do that. And in the end, that's what happened. Eagles didn't get a clean 1. They got 2 draft picks from the Colts, and we'll see what that conditional pick winds up being. But you cannot underestimate the fact that from a league standpoint, the guy was not going to yield a clean 1. You just couldn't. Where the guy's at this career is he was benched.
Right.
The optics of giving up a 1 for a guy who's benched, you just can't do that.
Right. I remember maybe 2 months ago when we really first started discussing this, we thought the Eagles would be able to get a clean one for Carson, but I also
Yeah.
thought we believed that more teams that do need quarterbacks would be involved. But at the end of the day, there really wasn't that much of a market for Carson, which is why they get this third round pick and a conditional second, which is not ideal. I think it is more. It becomes more ideal if they do reach those escalators, which aren't impossible. The guy has to play at least 70 to 75% of the snaps, and if he did last year, he did the year before. I know everybody talks about Carson Wentz's injury history, but he's actually stayed healthy the last 2 years. He was benched last year. He didn't get hurt at all. In fact, I think you've mentioned this many times. He wasn't even on the injury report at all for the last 2 years, if I'm correct.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. And of course, Clowney knocked him out through a concussion. Still a cheap.
No, I mean regular season, right?
Right. No, right. But I'm just saying, you're right. In terms of normal injuries, the starting quarterback, yeah, he didn't get hurt. At least he wasn't listed on the injury report. But it's I know. I would say this. You tell me if you agree. The fans just wanted this thing over. Whether they're happy or not, the Eagles didn't get anything more. One thing I will tell you that another team told me, which is a really important point to make, which I made on our show that dropped this morning, don't underestimate the ability to move this contract, not just the player, but to move the contract. I get the Eagles are going to take an enormous amount of dead money. That's not good. Mm-hmm. But you're out of the cash. You don't own that cash. It's important from an ownership standpoint. And when in terms of cash commitments for clubs, believe it or not, teams are given a cash budget that you can spend in free agency. So that does matter, and you're out of it in future years too. So that does matter. But in the end, the optics are bad when you're trading your franchise quarterback. That it got soured so quickly. It's just mind-boggling to me.
Yeah, we'll spend a few minutes in this live stream on what this means for the future, from cap-related purposes and how the Eagles move forward. But what I want to focus here on, where I think we can help add for our viewers and listeners, is some context to why this trade was consummated. I mean, we've talked about it before. We've talked about Carson Wentz not feeling supported. Wrote a column on InsideTheBirds.com that I would like everybody to check out. It really goes into, all the things that led to Carson not wanting to come back to the Eagles. It clearly wasn't just about, as we've said for a while, Doug Peterson, because they fired Doug Peterson, hired a new staff, and he still wanted out. But Adam, from an Eagles standpoint, they missed here I'm going to give this as my opinion, and you can fill in what you know.
Right.
They missed here in some kind of evaluation of who Carson was for it to have to lead to this. Meaning, I think they felt he was built for adversity, built for toughness, built to kind of endure some of the stuff that goes on. And whether you want to blame Carson for it or whether you want to blame the Eagles for it or both, nonetheless, they probably miscalculated on what they could do to keep this guy and what makes this guy tick a little bit. I have to think they miscalculated as well.
You mean in terms of adversity? You mean if things go wrong, how do you handle it?
And also, they had to give him some hard coaching earlier in his year, and then they got softer with the coaching, and that wound up backfiring on them. I don't think that they anticipated that a little bit of a change in coach and trying to then coach him a little harder with other guys was going to have the impact that it did, because he came here with a little bit of a sense of entitlement. We've talked about that before. DiFilippo had a butt heads with him, got him the right way, but that way got lost. And I don't think that the Eagles expected or anticipated that would happen.
Off that point you just made, I think this is where the miscalculation was made. So you mentioned Reich and DiFilippo leave. Okay. The Eagles obviously knew how he was being coached. So they had an opportunity to go and hire someone else, maybe. Someone else could coach harder. They didn't do that. They stayed with Press Taylor. That was a mistake. We've talked about this now for 3 years. What did we talk about in our first show we ever did in 2018?
Yep. The adjustment to the new coaches. That's right.
It's going to be a real issue.
Nailed that. Right.
Yeah, we knew it was going to be a real issue. We didn't know when, though. I'll tell you the truth, folks. I never thought this would happen. I'm not going to lie. I was wrong. I never thought they'd eat the $33 million plus, as our friend Andrew Brandt did the same thing. I started back off that the last month when you and I had incredible sourcing on this. We were like, this is way worse than I expected. Wentz's issues with the organization wasn't just I think you wrote it in our piece, right? On our piece on InsideTheBirds.com. Yeah. There wasn't one particular person or one particular issue that he had an issue with. It was all the above. He just had issues, whether it was drafting Jalen Hurts in the second round, whether it was The Michael Silver piece on his source questioning
His
work
practice
ethic.
habits.
Can you
Right.
imagine having to answer that question? I have no problem with Michael Silver doing his job. He did a great job on that. But
Mm-hmm.
and then Doug Peterson, I don't care what anybody says. When Doug Peterson says, and he's asked by the local media here in Philly, is Carson still your starter? ... Today is Wednesday. Can you imagine if Wentz hears that? How are you backing your quarterback? I'm not him. I didn't play football except for ninth grade, but I was a punter. I can't imagine what that would feel like. I'm not making excuses for him. Wentz should have been benched. He deserved to be benched probably before he got benched. In fact, we know he should have.
Right.
But in terms of human using empathy here, at what point do you set enough is enough as a football player? You could say, oh, he's a baby and all that. Okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm trying to call it down the middle here. I don't know Carson Wentz.
Mm-hmm.
But gathering information like Jeff and I did over the last 4 to 6 weeks, the more stuff I heard, I said he's not coming back. No chance. Zero.
Right. And you're right that
zero.
You're right that you can look at this from two different lenses. Really, you can look at it as, you know what, Carson Wentz did have to deal with some unfortunate stuff. So do other quarterbacks. They paid him over $100 million. He should have been able to handle that. And I know some people in the organization feel that way, that they know that not everything was perfect, but to seemingly just dismiss everybody and say, I want out, is not the Carson Wentz they thought they had. But I also understand Carson, his camp, his supporters, and how they feel that, as you just mentioned, he's kind of taken a beating for no fault of his own. And that answer that he gave on the Mike Silver question, right, was very telling. He said, look, the media leaves practice after 10 minutes. So nobody really sees how my practices are. So where could that possibly be coming from? He asked. Well, obviously, it's got to be somebody involved in the organization, because they're the only people who see practice.
Can't have that.
How he felt backstabbed.
Right.
Yeah.
Can't have that. Now, I know from an organizational standpoint, some of the issues that they were disappointed with Carson is, why were these stories coming up about his dissatisfaction with the club during the regular season when coaches are trying to save their jobs? I can tell you as a fact, a couple of people told me close to the situation, they were not happy with that disappointed them. Like, if you got issues, take care of it after the season. Right. Timing was not good. I know Carson's a pretty classy guy, but I know that bothered some people, and I know the coaches were not happy. I'll tell you that much. They weren't happy. The timing could not have been worse. And then the hope was, though, Jeff, as we move this forward, I do believe at one point, maybe the Eagles would have to say something different about it, but I do believe at one point they thought through the interview process, maybe this could be brought forward. Maybe Sirianni, well, actually not Sirianni, because I don't think they didn't know who they were hiring, but maybe the new staff, whoever would be able to mend fences. But Carson was not backing off. It just, I mean, you and I have talked privately about this, where we were hearing like, oh, holy smokes, this is not going to end well. Right. That's why I never backed off. Two things I never backed off. He was going to the Colts. And the biggest thing you and I knew was that he was not staying no matter what. There was point of no return. It's the best term that I've heard. I think that's a really good one. People have used. Yep. And it never should have got to this point, man. It's embarrassing, quite frankly.
I agree. To borrow a Chip Kelly line, Cortez burned the boats. No going back from that. So Carson Wentz will be a Colt. And obviously, if you're an Eagles, if you've been a Carson Wentz supporter throughout this, you're probably going to root for him to be repaired well and for the Colts to do well, because that means that the Eagles can then get a first-round pick if they need. Exactly. So it works at least a little bit in that sense.
It'll be painful though, because if he plays well, I mean, I know we'll see. But we saw in 17. I know it's 2017, folks. I get it, but we know what the ceiling is. The ceiling is a top 5 NFL quarterback with elite talent. The talent really is not the issue anymore. It's everything else with him. And maybe getting into another atmosphere is going to help. Maybe it is. As I deemed it last week, a soft landing. That's what it is. It's a soft landing with a guy that he really likes in Frank Reich. Mm-hmm. And Press Taylor's a senior offensive assistant. We'll see how that works out. But from an Eagles standpoint, now it's the Jalen Hurts show for at least one season.
Yeah, let's get into that. And before we do that, we'll tell everybody, download the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app right now. Use the promo code ITB to get all of your sign-up bonuses. ITB is your promo code for all those sign-up bonuses on the top-rated DraftKings Sportsbook app. So as we've talked about in the pod a couple of times, the coaching interview went on where Jeffrey would ask what people's plans are to repair or rebuild Carson, or what is their plan for Carson Wentz. But also never officially said you're getting this guy. So
Right.
there was always that kind of ambiguity here, and now Nick Sirianni will not have the opportunity. And really, Nick walks into a difficult situation. The Eagles are clearly have to, whether they want to use the word or not, they have to rebuild this year. They're in cap hell. They're going to have to make a lot of moves in the next coming weeks. They don't have a lot of dynamic playmaking talent. They've got some, but not a lot, at least proven. And now you got the quarterback that you got to groom here.
Yeah. So the way the league sees this, I've talked to a bunch of teams that they've either talked to the Eagles, because what happens is we were talking about this on our, definitely, if you've not heard our show today, listen to it, because there's a lot we're not going to be able to talk about in here. But I'll give you a little cliff note here. I talk about on this show today that teams, this is when they make trade calls or, hey, what are you doing with this guy? He's got a big salary here. We might be interested if you're willing to trade him to us, or if you're going to release, they're not going to tell them that they're going to sign. They want to know what the team is doing with it. So they look at the Eagles roster. They say this is a complete rebuild. This is the way the other teams see it. This is a rebuild. It is what it is. This is the way.
The Eagles never used that word, but I don't know how anybody who's looking at it objectively. It doesn't mean things can't happen. You can be ahead of schedule. Maybe Jalen Hurts turns out to be a very good quarterback. We'll have to even see if that's how it goes. Maybe you get really good development with Jalen Reagor, and also Miles Sanders stays healthy. It's not like they're a terrible team.
No, they've got
they're young. Yeah,
I would say this. I wouldn't call it a complete rebuild. But the people I've spoken to who've mentioned the Eagles to me when we talk about other teams is that it is a rebuild, because, as you just said, if you go through this roster, how many blue chip players do they have on their team? Not many.
Not many. Not too many. And some of them who are blue chippers are a little bit on the other side. Like Fletcher Cox is still a very good defensive tackle, one of the best in the league, but he's obviously entering the twilight of his career, not emerging.
Correct.
As a player. I wonder about some of the, like a guy like Darius Slay that they traded for, and they renegotiated his deal so that he was cheaper on the first year and more expensive this coming year. What you do with him? Because if you don't think you're going to be very good, does it make sense to have this really high-paid cornerback? I mean, that's just one guy who jumps into my head.
Yeah, they're locked into Slay this season. His base salary is fully guaranteed of $12 million. Now the next 2 years are unguaranteed. It's $16 million and $17 million. So if he doesn't play well this season, they could cut him without owing him anything. There's not a lot of dead money. There'd be, if they cut him after this season, we're talking about Darius Slay here, it'd be about $6.5 million dead money. Not too bad. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at this roster, they have to get younger. It seems like we say this every year, but they have to. And it's not a secret. Jeffrey Lurie talked about this before, about getting younger. Howie Roseman's talked about, the Eagles general manager, about getting younger. It's got to happen now with the draft. They've got to do better with this draft, and it starts this season.
I think there's two things they got to do, Adam. You're right. And to avoid this situation happening again, they obviously have to find a quarterback, whether it's Jalen Hurts or somebody else, support that quarterback, not just financially, but with players around him and through the media and however possible. And they've got to clean up their own act. I brought this up a couple of times that everything we went through there with Carson Wentz that turned him against the organization. You can't have that happen. You can't have reports leaking. There was one report that leaked that said that Howie Howie preferred one different receiver over another in the first round of the draft right after Doug Peterson gets fired, which I felt doesn't look good on the organization when on board with your former coach there. So they've got to stop that. I know it's a big market team. I know stuff gets out, but they as an organization have to clean up their act and be unified. They have to make moves together and support the team together. When they lose together. When they win together, for this kind of situation not to happen again. So it's not just all on Carson. Yeah,
I agree. Look, they need to learn from this. Yeah, point well taken. They absolutely have to learn from this situation. Let me ask you a question. Let me bounce something at you. Someone asked me this through text, and I think it's a great question, because it played in what you were talking about like 5-10 minutes ago. Was it a mistake? Did the Eagles make a mistake trading up for Carson Wentz now that we have this ending, unfortunately?
No, I think people misinterpreted something I said a while back. That I called this whole thing an organizational failure. And I didn't mean the entire process from drafting him till now. I meant what led him from being an MVP caliber quarterback to a guy coming back from an injury and having a pretty good year 2 years after that, The failure is everything that happened from the end of 2019 that led to today's, agreement of a trade. That's the failure, because this at the end of 2019, there's no way anybody in the front office or in the coaching staff thought 1 year later that the entire coaching staff was going to be fired, Wentz was going to be benched, that there was going to be this friction between Wentz and the organization. None of that was in the blueprint, obviously. No. So that's the failure. The failure is you had a franchise quarterback who played well enough that even after struggling, he led you to the playoffs by going 4-0 down the stretch. And now it's incumbent upon you. You just signed him to a long-term deal. It's incumbent upon you to build around him and build the thing back up. And instead, everything just fell apart. That's where the failure is. But no, not picking him number 2 overall. I thought he had a really good rookie year, even though it wasn't perfect. He had a very good second year, obviously. Without that ability of him to win the 11 or 12 games, they don't win the Super Bowl. So that part makes sense. It's more about everything that happened to me after the 2019 season ended.
And how they managed him after Reich and DiFilippo left turned out to be
a good point too.
Absolute disaster. Yeah. Absolute disaster, which you have to know the people in your building, what they're capable of doing or not. And from a head coaching standpoint, Doug Peterson's hands are all over this. You could there are a lot of people deserve blame here, no question about it. From a front office perspective, you can't dictate who coaches hire, but you have to know what's going to work and not work. You have to bring in better players there from a character standpoint. Okay, you can't have these leagues of players taking shots at your quarterback. Absolutely inexcusable. You cannot have that. If you find out about it, you get them the hell off the football team. I don't care how much the cap issue is. You get them the hell off your football team. You got to have people support it. You got to know what your quarterback needs. Yeah. If he's struggling with his confidence, figure the bleep out.
And this is the problem that fans have with what you just said, Adam. It's not like Howie is a first-year GM. It's not like Jeffrey just bought the team 2 or 3 years ago. The kind of errors in judgment here and lapses in judgment that led to all this. This shouldn't happen to guys who have been in this league for a long time. They should have known better. And I'm talking
about from a front office perspective. Your job is to bring in high character players who will not only compete. Staying healthy is always a challenge, but bring in guys who are supportive, who are good veteran leaders. How we've talked about the last couple of months about the wide receiver room is they need an alpha, a leader in that room with a bunch of young receivers. I was talking about Jarvis Landry, somebody like that who's really transformed the Browns locker room or helped do it. Those are the kind of guys that you need in your locker room. And this is a memo to the front office. They've got to bring better character guys in the locker room. Look, when guys like Malcolm Jenkins leave, that's going to be a problem because he's one of their better leaders. Right. I know it's not always easy to evaluate that because you look at 17, the guys that you bring a guy like Chris Long, okay, home run for character, okay, Malcolm Jenkins and others. As you get younger, you're going to need some veterans who don't need to be superstars, but have done it before, know how to lead and how to be supportive. I just think there's been too much of this for the last 3 to 4 years, particularly the last 3 after the Super Bowl and the decline of Wentz here to the point where you got benched, where people taking shots at him. If this happens, you got problems.
There you go. All right, let's wrap this up with where the Eagles go from here. Carson, that money will be off the books. It seems like the next person, as we talked about in the pod that dropped this morning, Zach Ertz could be the next person traded, right? I mean, that you strongly feel
he won't. That he's not going to be an Eagle in September. It's just a matter of, is he traded, released? I just don't see how it. At 30 years old, making over $8 million, Goddard's the guy at tight end. I mean, the time is now for Dallas Goedert, and we know we talked about in the show, the show that dropped today, that he's got to stay healthy. No question, it's a fact.
Right.
But they drafted for a reason in 18. They thought he would be the eventual replacement for Ertz. Well, now here we are. Time has flown, and they got to get these young guys on the field. Not that he's not, but he's got to stay. He's got to stay on the field more because of his health. We know the situation there. And as we also outlined in the show that dropped this new pod, they got to get they got to get another tight end. They got to get another tight end in there.
Yep, and I know everybody's excited about the potential of Kyle Pitts, although we don't know if they're going to do that at 6 overall.
I don't see it.
I know. Hey, we'll have plenty of pods to vote to that. And by the way, the Eagles do not play the Colts this coming season. I think they play them again in 2022. So we'll have to wait a little while, unless the Eagles play the Colts in the Super Bowl next year, to actually see Carson Wentz play the Eagles again. It should be fascinating. I will say, I think there's disappointment. I think some people were starting to believe that this wasn't going to happen. I think for some people they're relieved because it's finally over. But there's no doubt about this. It's about to be a new era of Eagles football. New coach, new quarterback, and in the next coming weeks, you're going to see a new roster. And we'll be all on top of it as we usually are at Inside the Birds. Any last final thoughts?
No, listen, folks. If you're an Eagles fan, I know there's some Colts fans watching. We'll get into Wentz in our next show about what he can do for you guys. But in terms of the Eagles, I would hope that the Eagles don't trade their draft picks away. I would hope they would have at least 10 with compensatory picks, somewhere around that number. Mm-hmm. And this is a total got to nail the draft. There's no more excuses. I don't want to hear it. You're going to be a younger football team. It's got to be all about the draft. And Jeff and I will, right after free agency in the National Football League is way different than the NBA. It's over like that. And third week of March, it's all draft. Literally, that's it. You saw last year. We're going to have Greg Cosell involved. Did we review, like, how did we do it? We did it by division. I don't remember. What did we do last year?
We
did the East. We just did the East.
Yeah, we did the NFC East, kind of comparing the Eagles to every team. And then, we got Greg involved with our draft coverage, which I think we'll do again.
Yep.
And our post-draft coverage, which we'll do again. Our next podcast will drop Monday at 6 a.m. We'll tie up some loose ends from today and in the next few days on Carson Wentz, and then we'll continue to look forward to what happens from here. So make sure everybody's checking out the Inside the Birds podcast. Whatever podcast platform you listen to, also our YouTube channel, which you might be watching this on now. We put all of our content on the YouTube channel, and make sure you hit up InsideTheBirds.com for even more of our content. Thanks everybody for watching. This has been Inside the Birds live in ITB TV. We thank you for watching. Have a great rest of the week.